Welcome to the Alcohol Tipping Point podcast. I'm your host, Deb Maisner. I'm a registered nurse, health coach, and alcohol-free badass. I have found that there's more than one way to address drinking. If you've ever asked yourself if drinking is taking more than it's giving, or if you found that you're drinking more than usual, you may have reached your own alcohol tipping point. The Alcohol Tipping Point is a podcast for you to find tips, tools, and thoughts to change your drinking. Whether you're ready to quit forever or a week, this is the place for you. You are not stuck and you can change. Let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you. I want to take a sec to invite you to the next Alcoholiday. It's a monthly dry group where I help people practice not drinking. This is for you if you feel like you're struggling, if you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you're broken, you're never going to get it. I want to just support you and arm you with lots of different tools to battle cravings, work on your thinking about drinking, be more kind and compassionate to yourself as you're doing this. You know, drinking is a habit, and it's probably something you've done for years or decades even. So it takes a while to unwind it. And that's why I'm so passionate about focusing on practicing not drinking, working on progress, not perfection. I love the saying, focus on the direction, not perfection. And I think it's important just to have these types of groups, programs that just give you a safe place that has no shame, no judgment. A safe place where you can just learn new tools and just start unwinding the habit so that it gets easier and easier for you to drink less or not at all. I would love to have you join the next Alcoholiday. It starts the first of every month. As a podcast listener, you always get 20% off by using the code LOVE, L-O-V-E. And it is hosted on a private platform. It is a HIPAA protected platform. It's really important to me as a nurse just to have privacy and a safe place for you. And what you get is daily emails, lessons, accountability. You get lots and lots of tools to battle cravings. You get a really detailed guidebook, journal to help you out during those 30 days, 31 days, whatever the length of the month is. And then you get downloadable audio meditations, just something to go to when you're feeling a craving. We also do weekly group chats, weekly group support calls led by me and another sober coach twice a week. And then there's also a private chat where you can just share with others, support others. And it's just a great place to practice not drinking. The cost is $89. US dollars, that is. So it's less than $3 a day. Plus, use that LOVE code to get your discount. And just a little background on me, I have been a registered nurse for 20 years. I'm a board certified health coach. I'm a smart recovery certified facilitator, an addiction certified mental health professional. I'm a mindfulness instructor. And then you all know I like to call myself an alcohol-free badass. I've been alcohol-free for 4.5 years now. So I would love to see you in the next group. You can sign up at alcoholtippingpoint.com/alcoholiday and join there. I also will link it in my show notes. Wherever you are with your drinking journey, just know that I am rooting for you, that you are not broken, and you can change. Thanks so much. Welcome back to the podcast. On the show today is Michael Ferrer. He is the founder of SoberPress, and he is on a mission to inspire 1 million people for change. SoberPress is a safe place where people can experience and share their stories of recovery. When we recover out loud, no one dies in silence. So welcome to the show, Mike. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I do. I just want to know more about you, who you are and what you do. I thought you were in Portland still, but you're in Austin. So you went from one weird city to another weird city.
Let it
But
be
can
known.
give us an intro background about you.
Well, first and foremost, I am an alcoholic. Identify myself as that. It's part of what keeps me accountable, I think. But beyond that, I am a graphic designer by trade. Cut my teeth in advertising, and I was able to run global accounts and national accounts and that kind of thing. So this is me kind of withdrawing myself from those high pressure days and trying to maintain a level of sobriety so that you know I can live a peaceful and serene life. That's to me what is the most important thing. But yeah, my background, I'm first generation American of Cuban descent. And I was born in a very normal, supportive, loving household. Nothing crazy or anything like that. My parents were really, really amazing, supportive people. My poor dad, I put him through the ringer when I finally sort of announced that my plans for a career had to do with art.
What did they do?
Well, mom's side of the family has artists and dad's side of the family has artists. And dad encouraged me to maybe think about engineering. You can draw and do all kind of cool things with that. He was pushing me toward somewhere that was a little bit safer career wise. However, I had a different mind, and I was a painter. I loved to draw. I didn't do well in high school. And a lot of it had to do with after school, smoking weed, drinking beer. But beyond that, I did go to college, actually did super well in college, got scholarships, and then on to art school, did really well there, even better, and got scholarships there as well. And then I took my first job in Portland, Oregon, where I was thrown into the fire at age 25 and became right off the bat an art director. So I worked for a very small advertising firm with a notorious writer, creative director in Portland. And it was a very respected agency, and there was a lot of pressure. And along with that came, I was always had problems with anxiety. Going to Portland, the darkest, coldest, rainiest place in the world. Well, maybe Seattle and Alaska, but the Northwest is pretty unforgiving when it comes to no sun. I've spent most of my life in the South. So kind of being uprooted right off the bat, thrown into a career that's extremely, demanding, and then having the level of anxiety and depression that I had, it really was sort of in front of me. Everything was a priority but myself. And it wasn't until that I can actually like pause, learn to love myself, and begin to really realize what the priorities should be. Because I wasn't present for the people that loved me. I wasn't present for myself. You know, down the road, I wasn't even present for my job. And it showed because I started ghosting. I literally would not show up for work. And that's what led to my best friend coming into the house and doing his own little intervention. So I had to spend time at the ER, and it was a whole mess at the ER. But when I showed up, I was drunk, and Will's my best friend, and he was there the entire time while, I talked to social workers and whatnot in order to finally agree that, yeah, I need to go to rehab again. And I'm really grateful that I did. It was a godsend. And sometimes you feel like you get that spiritual tap on the shoulder where you kind of have to say, hey, you know what? This is time.
Mm,
So
yeah.
that's the journey leading up until April 9th, 2019.
Well, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
So you kinda went the more traditional route of doing a detox, of doing inpatient rehab, of doing AA,
Yep.
and then you founded SoberPress later on, which you said is showing just all different ways that we can recover, that we can change our stories. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. So we know like April 9th, 2019 was an interesting time to number one, quit my job and not have a backup. I was gonna go freelance, but I didn't want to do it right away. Luckily, I had enough saved that theoretically I could keep myself afloat and pay bills and everything for about a year. So I had like a little over a year's salary saved. And so I was pretty leisurely, although I started getting busy right away anyhow. But then the pandemic hit. And it was in the midst of the pandemic when we had to isolate and we had to wear masks and the smiles went away, in-person meetings went away. I mean, life as we knew it changed completely, and I was kind of out of my mind going, "What the hell?" I was in isolation during the last 5 years of my alcoholism. I didn't socialize. So here I was kind of beginning to feel the idea of what normalcy feels like. But then the pandemic hit, and I was not about to pick up the booze again. That was something I had made up my mind about, that I just wanted that to be left behind permanently. And while we all know that, nothing is ever permanent, we're all vulnerable and it takes work every day. For me, I had this idea and I bought a URL, soberpress.org, and I had put together this whole presentation kind of more for me, but then I started showing it to people. And it was the idea of Sober Press, a place where people can, experience and tell stories to allow others to know that they're not alone and that recovery is possible. And later, it was also in the idea that when we recover out loud, no one dies in silence. And and then I also began, as I did more of research, a lot of the stigma has to do with the stigma of addiction in general, has a lot to do with people just misunderstanding what addiction is. And so that also contributes to the stigma itself. But I didn't learn any of this until after. For me, this was going to be my lifesaver. This is an endeavor that, I was showing to my friends and to my family just in order to kind of get validation and affirmation. And once I had that, a girlfriend was like, "Well, I mean, that's a lot to do. Why don't you just start with an Instagram?" And August of 2020, I started with an Instagram, and I had no idea what an amazing community I was about to discover. And it's amazing, people like you. I mean, all kind of podcasts. I mean, one of my first podcasts was with a gentleman out of Johannesburg. And anyway, long story short, by October 2020, I was already pushing stories out and they were coming out like every other week. And so I've been able to maintain, a level of consistency since then. Of course, there are lapses, but for the most part, I've been pretty consistent every other week putting stories out. And they're purposefully put out there in words, although I have embraced the idea of doing videos and multimedia, but I try to do it in words because there's an intimacy there that I feel like when somebody can sit there with their phone in their hand and read the words written authentically by these people that submit their stories, it has a greater effect. And it's almost like, you know, reading a good book because these stories, I mean, they're all kinds of journeys from all walks of life. And they're empowering because you can see that people against all odds have picked themselves up and got it back together and have like recovered and are duly recovering every day. But not only that, it also offers what I what I call, and I've read this before, so it's not a thing that I came up with, but one story actually becomes someone else's survival guide. So people that are new in recovery or curious of recovery can actually pick up and read these stories, and perhaps the idea is to give them that nudge of let's maybe think about you. Because of this intimacy of words, I think it's a little easier for people to actually put themselves in their shoes and understand where they're coming from. So, I think it's one of these things that if I can help one out of a million people, that would be awesome. Job done. That's always been part of the mission is if I could create change in someone, that's the biggest. But if at all, I can actually leave them feeling a little more inspired than they were before. That's the other mini mission.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your mission to inspire a million people for change, and I think that's why it's so important, what you're doing, and what also I on this podcast, I'm like, I want to have people on from all different walks of life, all different stories of how they changed their drinking, just so people know, like, there's not just one way to change your drinking. There's not just one way to get sober. There are so many different ways. But also that aspect of seeing real people like overcome, not only survive, like thrive. And it's that hero's journey that we all love. We all love to root for someone and see someone, and it's even more helpful when you can see someone who mirrors yourself, because I end up working with a lot of women, a lot of nurses reach out to me because we can see ourselves in each other, and so that gives you hope, and possibility, totally.
Yes, I'm over here nodding like a bobblehead doll if you don't have me on camera. But yes, absolutely. I feel like there's so many stories that actually overlap, or if not that, congruencies that may not be the exact same journey, but are similar. That suddenly you see this pair arise that I think that, defies what people think is beyond human achievement when it comes to recovery. Because I know, and I've read this before in other stories, that I didn't think I would ever be able to recover. You know, I was a huge drinker, and I I there were days when I would drink from the moment I woke up all the way up until the time I went to bed. It was seriously that strong of an addiction for me, and it started infringing upon like my own health. I started developing all kind of health problems because of it. And what sucks about drinking is that it is sort of the sneaky killer because it seems harmless compared to other hard drugs, but it kills you slowly, and there's not that apparent contrast. It's one of those things that you can die in multiple different ways by drinking heavily every day. but I'm lucky that, I didn't suffer any major health consequences, even though I did spend time in the hospital multiple times, and the addiction was so hard that just as soon as I got out of the hospital and started feeling better, I started drinking again. It's sort of the damning part of it all. That's the definition of insanity,
Mm.
really. But to get back on point, yes, I agree. I think we need to celebrate everybody's path. We're all different, and it's important to find your way. There's not one way of recovering, but hundreds, thousands of ways. And I feel like we need to celebrate and support everybody's path because in the end, we're all on a congruent journey, and it's a journey that never ends. And there's work to be done every day, no matter what your path is. And there are multiple ones, like I said, but we have to wake up every day and do it all over again.
Well, one of the things you said, like, was a common theme you saw, and that I hear people say a lot, like, "I never thought I'd get to where I am now." Like, would never in a million years have thought, when I was 20, like, "Hey, when you're when you're 47, you're gonna be, like, an alcohol-free badass and have a podcast and be sober." I would have been like, "What?" Or even when you're in the depths of trying to quit
Yeah,
and you think like,
it's
"I'm
hard.
never gonna get to the other side," but you do, and what are some of, like, the other common threads or patterns that you've seen with all these stories you've been hearing about?
Well, it's funny you ask because gosh, there are so many different ones, but one that I experienced for myself that echoes others is, and this is so ironic for me because, in at the height of my addiction, I was single, didn't have a girlfriend, I lived alone, I had 2 dogs, and I would hide my bottles. I would
Oh,
not
yes.
take them out to the recycling bin because I didn't want anybody to know that I was an alcoholic. I had so many, like, whiskey bottles and vodka bottles, so I would just stash them in different parts of the kitchen cabinets, so I wouldn't have to bother seeing the aftermath of empties when I woke up because it was that bad, and it was a way for me to ignore the reality, and I think I can see that with people who are trying to hide the drink from their spouse or husband. And I've heard those stories of that is like hiding, the reality. And that's something that we all do. And that's part of the insanity of not acknowledging what we should be acknowledging. And that's the first step to recovery is saying, you know what? I'm drinking way too much and doing something about it. And I've had the stories of people who have been able to kind of catch themselves before they are in a mode of major self-destruction. They wake up from a huge binge and decide that day that they're done, that they don't want to drink anymore. And I've seen people recover from that moment. And I think really that's what it boils down to is acknowledging that you have a problem and doing something about it, actually taking action. And that's the hardest thing in the world. Coming to terms and submitting.
Yeah, yeah. The 3 hardest things to say are, "I have a problem, I need help, and
Yes.
Worcestershire sauce."
Worcestershire. Oh, I love that.
I
Love
saw
it.
that as a meme,
You
and
need
I'm
to
just like, "That
that's
is
a that
it."
is a great post. You need to put that out there.
So what do you see for people who are successful? Because you're getting all these success stories. What are some key aspects of being successful, of getting sober? What are some things you think are most
I you
helpful?
know, I think the biggest thing is fighting the uglies, you know? It's just at its very core, there's a looming mental health issue. And it may not be like the case for everyone, but more people than not usually either develop a mental health issue or have had one looming. For me, it was anxiety, low self-esteem, depression. So it was those things that I was like trying to bury and numb down in order to sort of find that liquid courage. And but in the end, it hit me hit me a lot harder than I would have ever imagined. But it's what I call fighting the uglies is looking at what are the trauma events that you need to face if you have trauma or PTSD, or what are the mental health factors that perhaps are looming that cause you to drink. That is an everyday thing. No one is, that's again, it's one of those things that you can't just flip a switch and say, hey, I'm cured, but it's an everyday fight. And it helps to have counseling, it helps to have close friends, it helps to talk about it, have it out in the open, and do the things that you need to do in order to deal with it. And each set of circumstances is different and it requires a different effort. But the key is to actually every day to try to make headway and get better at it. And you have to face all that. And that's the hard part because you're no longer numbing down. You have to do it in a very raw and very real way, and it's exhausting sometimes. And that's I think the hardest part, but it's also the most rewarding.
Mm, yeah. So you would say, like, finding the reasons you were drinking, finding other ways to self-soothe, other coping mechanisms.
Mhm.
Um, what does that look like for you for working on it daily?
So community is such a huge thing, and there's so much you get from a community. You get, for me, I get self-assurance, I get affirmation, I get empathy, I get compassion. Um, these are all reinforcements that I think is sort of hardwired in our human needs. That feeling of acceptance and safety, and that is my outlet for others. So it's a platform where they can feel safe to be able to express themselves. And I feel like a lot of self expression for me comes in journaling, it comes with making art and being able to create a post and write about it and put it out. I try to be as thoughtful as I can. Um, it's one of those things that I kind of do it more for me than I do for anyone else. So a lot of what I put out there is something that I'm thinking about, perhaps something that I'm trying to work through. And it's that process of sharing that actually heals. So I think if I were to say any one thing, for me, it was the community. And it started with going to meetings. And I stumbled upon a great community on Instagram. I've I have turned it into Facebook. I'm also ambassador of Sober Isn't Cool and Sober Hope. And I also help others. That is such a huge thing. I've met so many really good people online, and I want to help. I want to like be interested in the things that they're doing. And I feel like is just getting in there and participating, because service is the other part that really actually pays you back. The more you pay it forward, the more it pays you back. And I talk about community and I talk about service quite a bit because that's what's helped me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you mentioned you wanted to talk about is emotional sobriety. What does that mean to you?
So I've posted about this and I feel like it emotional sobriety is one of those things that I think that bleeds into the golden rule, if you will. And it's literally the idea of doing the right thing for yourself and others. So, in other words, it's being a considerate and sober person no matter what, no matter what the things that you face are, is always trying to be thoughtful and present to your own emotions and be aware, self-aware. And you know what? We're human and we're not perfect. And we do get impatient. We do get tempered. We do get agitated. We do get prickly. But being able to be mindful of that kind of thing will actually serve you and serve others better. There's an extraordinary an extraordinary amount of peace that comes along with emotional sobriety. And I feel like that when you're like really self-aware and you try to, approach every specific problem with a even and clear mind and clear head, you're able to be more effective about influencing. And again, we're all human. None of us are immune from these emotions, but it's the idea of working on it. There's this thing, I don't know if I believe in it or not, but I've heard it, dry drunk,
Yeah,
where
what is that? Is dry drunk an AA thing? Did that
it
come
I
from
believe
AA?
I believe so. And while I got sober in the rooms in via AA, my path has veered. And like I said, we all have our own path. When people are just starting out, I usually recommend AA because there is that set of guardrails that is effective, but I don't recommend like continuing it. I always feel like everybody makes their own modifications, if not veering from it altogether. And
Hmm.
it's one of those things. But you asked me about, is it an AA thing, dry drunk? I think, yeah, by definition, I believe they may have coined that phrase, but the idea of a dry drunk is someone who has all of the bad emotional sort of baggage that goes along with an addiction. However, they're sober, and that means that someone that maybe has not done the inner work that they need in order to find peace and serenity within their heart and soul. And like I said, it's such a broad net to cast that I don't think it's fair. In a way, I'm kind of regretting that I even brought it up, but
Well, I think it's
it's one of those
interesting.
things that it's a thing, and we have to be aware of that when we want to achieve, a level of emotional sobriety, having that peaceful, serene mind. There's work to get to that point, and otherwise, because we have the innate ability to be ornery and cantankerous and have these flaws about us that if we don't get them addressed, they'll continue to follow us. And in the end, it's the belief that that will take you down yet again, back down the path of drinking or
Mm,
drugging or whatever, because it does erode your peace and serenity.
hmm.
That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, it's interesting. And so, emotional sobriety is just like being able to manage and express your emotions and all emotions too. I mean, I always tell people like there's no bad or good emotions. They're all messengers, what are they trying to tell us? How can we express them in a healthy way? And so
Agreed.
that's kind of more emotional sobriety.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, it's being mindful to yourself and others,
Yeah, you
because
said the golden rule, treat others
yeah,
the way you want to be treated.
that's it. I mean, it's no secret that hurt people hurt others,
Mm,
but people who are emotionally sober won't hurt others intentionally, and I know that when I was, really far gone in my alcoholism, I was very hurtful. And that was a lot of the reason why I isolated myself. I just did not want to be around people, you know, for fear of hurting them.
mm.
I had a short temper and classic being negative and cantankerous and sarcastic, and it's okay to be that every once in a while, but that was sort of my way of life, and that was because of my addiction.
Yeah.
But, it's important to be able to express yourself, but not at the expense of others.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point. What are you looking forward to then? What's next for you?
Well, I am always working on trying to improve SoberPress and trying to take part in the community and do my best to help others out. So that would always be sort of at the top of my list. I love what I do. I love interacting with the people in the community. There's so many great people such as yourself, so I love to be able to just continue to interact and support and be of service, and if anything, just cheer someone on, you know. I I think it's great. There's this contagious energy within the Instagram community that I found, and that in of itself is very addictive. It's so cool. And
Yeah, it is a great example of the positive power of social media and technology.
yeah, it's great. I also love that people celebrate themselves in a very authentic way when you start to compare like people outside of our community that have this mask on. There's something about our community, in recovery, that they're okay with being themselves, and they're okay with putting forth if they're having a bad day, expressing that. And to me, I think there's something at the core very authentic and genuine about our community that I love. That's all.
And I think that's what people want, and I think that's why people like to hear the stories, these overcoming stories like, "Oh, I" because for a lot of people, it's such a secret that they've been struggling with, and so to see someone tell their secrets and they told it out loud in a public space and they survive, not only survive, but thrive, like, oh, what a great example of, oh, maybe I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage anybody to reach out to me if you're interested in telling your story. I embrace all like lengths of sobriety and routes of sobriety. And I think everybody's journey is very unique and is inspirational. But also want to say that I've had people who want to submit their story, but then have this great trepidation about it of, oh no, who's going to see this? And, you know, And
Mm.
I get that because it's kinda big and scary to be out there, right? And it's like, it's okay if you have second thoughts and you don't wanna do it now, that's fine. If anything, you got the exercise of writing your journal, which is really, really helpful, like, it's self-help, and I've actually had people who submit their stories and had them published and come back later and say, I never thought I would be able to do this, and I did it, and it feels amazing," you know, because they actually got to write it out. And now that's another thing that makes it different than in the interview because it's you facing the blank page and your own words. And there's that intimacy of words that you have to write down, you have to face, and you have to, actually read and reread. That is cathartic in a way.
Yeah, I think anytime people share their story, it ends up being so healing, so beneficial for themselves, but also the people who are listening. And
Yeah,
whatever way you decide to tell your story, I mean, and honestly, you
absolutely.
don't owe it to anybody, but there
You
is
don't.
something. I remember there was a podcast that I listened to before I quit drinking, but it was actually a local podcast, so it was people he was interviewing people in Boise, and I was just, like, obsessed with it. But what was helpful to me was, like, hearing I'm like, "Oh my gosh, these people live in Boise, and they overcame drinking, and wow." But the other thing that was helpful for me, and I wanna throw out here, whether you wanna contact me or Mike, but, like, I told myself, "When I get to the other side, when I get a year alcohol-free, I'm gonna tell my story. I'm gonna go on that podcast." Like, that was something that, like, was a guidepost for me. I
Mhm.
ended up he ended up stopping the podcast, but I ended up having him on my podcast. I'm like, "I have to tell we have to tell each other stories because you were a light post for me." And so even thinking about Mike and SoberPress, like if you have a story, your story you want to share, if you want to write it down and send it to Mike, you're going to help so many people, I promise you. And if you want to come on my podcast and tell your story, reach out to me or use it as a guidepost. Like something some light in the distance where you are gonna get to the other side and you're gonna wanna share your story, and like you said, Mike, that quote, like, "Your story becomes someone else's survival guide." It's so
Mhm.
true, it's so helpful for you and the other person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm really grateful for the platform that you provide to be able to tell your story and be able to express yourself in a very safe and I think peaceful way. Yeah, it's great that we have people like you that actually broadcast our stories and have the ability to express ourselves. And that's
Same
to
to you.
me, I appreciate it. And to me, I think that is the ultimate band-aid. Well, I hate to call it band-aid. That was a bad word.
Maybe it's a
It's
salve.
it's a healing, right? To be able to express yourself and be able to speak and actually get the empathy and compassion and be and feel safe is a process of healing.
It
Um,
really is.
yeah, it's such an important part. And I don't know. For me, when I was thinking about the idea before I did anything at all with Sober Press, that in itself, that process was healing to me. And it was a very deliberate and purposeful sort of experience in and of itself. But then to watch it actually come alive was it was extra. It was like beyond anything that I would have ever imagined. I was literally blown away, and I have this community. This community is like they're incredible. They're all comrades, you
Yeah, I
know?
love it. We're in a cult.
We're
We are
we
part
are,
of a
but
cult.
it's a good cult.
It's a good cult. Will there be a book? I mean, you could put these all together in a book, right? Is that in your
Well,
future?
I I love that you brought that up. I have not, made any plans to make a book, about these stories specifically, but at some point, I would love to, move in a direction of a book someday. I love writing and I love designing. I don't know where that's gonna take me, but, I would actually love to be able to, you know, share my wisdom in a different way or my learnings. I hate to call it wisdom, but it's my learnings because I think sharing is a part of the service that everyone benefits from, right? And
Mm.
that's my hope is that people can walk away enlightened, entertained, or inspired.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, I picture this beautiful book with your background in art and illustration and then these words and I'm like, you let me know. That's your guidepost. Like, I am the prize,
I
Mike.
love that. I love that idea.
Oh,
That would be
yeah.
so cool.
Right?
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna make it happen, people. Okay, Mike, how can people find you and Sober Press?
My web address is soberpress.org. It is purely focused on stories. I do have a shop just selling a couple of different things, but my focus is on the stories and the people that tell them. And then there is a tab where you can submit your own story. It's a form that you fill out. I do encourage people to go and explore the website before sharing. But also, when you do, there are options to share. You can just write until your heart's content, or there are questions that you can answer. So it doesn't matter either which way. It's safe to share. And there's a huge process where you're part of the collaboration as we go. And yeah, so that part is
Very,
great. I
very
run a
cool.
a Facebook group called SoberPress. Just search SoberPress on Facebook. It's a private group, so you'll need to ask to join. And then Sober Hope group, I also help admin. It's something I'm an ambassador for. So look them up on Facebook. And then I am Sober Press at on Instagram. So if you want to find me there, I try to post something every day, if not twice a day. And that's all. That's my whole thing.
That's enough. I'll put the links in our show notes too, definitely. So,
Cool.
thank you, Mike. I'm so glad we got to meet.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Yes. I hope that you have a wonderful day and I look forward to sharing more stories together in the
Yeah,
future.
I would love if you're interested in at all, I'll throw that out there for you. I would love to share your story, but just think about it. There's never any pressure when I throw an offer out. There are times I reach out to people and say, "Hey, I'd love to feature you." And, not everybody bites, but that's okay. I'm never
Yeah.
pressuring anyone.
And I would say to people too, like if you're like, I don't have a very interesting story, they are all your story
Absolutely.
is valid.
Everybody's
Your
story is
story
lovely.
is you, and there's only one you, and it's so
I
worth
couldn't agree
hearing.
more. Absolutely.
Mhm.
People think that I audition, and it's like, no, I mean, that's a questionnaire. It's a form that's going to be your story, and you're going to be on.
Yeah.
It's
Awesome.
that simple.
Ah. Well, thank you so much. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful
Deb.
day, a wonderful week, and we'll be in
All right.
touch.
You too. Take care.
You
Bye, you
too.
guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Alcohol Tipping Point podcast. Please share and review the show so you can help other people too. I want you to know I'm always here for you, so please reach out and talk to me on Instagram at Alcohol Tipping Point, and check out my website, alcoholtippingpoint.com, for free resources and help. No matter where you are on your drinking journey, I want to encourage you to just keep practicing, keep going. I promise you are not alone and you are worth it. Every day you practice not drinking is a day you can learn from. I hope you can use these tips we talked about for the rest of your week, and until then, talk to you next time.